Welcome to It's Not You, It's Grief, a safe space to have candid conversations surrounding the many faces of grief. How do you handle the process while moving forward and ultimately getting back to living in the moment? Come on this journey as we navigate grief through the art of storytelling. And now for your host, Ahira Smith.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of It's Not You, It's Grief. Thank you so much for joining. This is June, everybody. We made it to June, and there's so much happening this month. Everything from, we got Father's Day happening this month, and we also have a month that is known as Black Music Month. And so I am so excited to have this special guest with me. This is Mr. Melvin Gentry. He is a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, 82 Initiative, and from University of Kentucky, Kappa Tau Chapter. I also know that this gentleman here happens to be a graduate of UK. And he has worked in the airline industry for 26 years, believe it or not, 26 years. And he's known as a Language Qualify Flight Attendant. So he is a translator for those who speak Portuguese and French. And he has a love, a passion for that of music, a specific genre of music known as house music. And for those who don't know, I'm a house head. I love me some house music. I grew up with it. And so I couldn't help but ask this gentleman, who also happens to be my cousin, yes, I have my family here, to come on and just share his experience regarding grief, because he has unfortunately have lost some close loved ones over the most recent years. And I wanted him to speak about how his journey has been and how music, particularly house music, has helped him in terms of his healing. And so without further ado, I would love to introduce you all to Mr. Melvin Gentry. Hey, Melvin.
Hey, Doug. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Good. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story with my audience. I am so excited about this because, you know, this is something that's personal to both of us in terms of what grief has done in the recent years in our lives, as well as music. Because I know for me, music has definitely helped me get through some really difficult times. And so couldn't think of a better person to ask, somebody who can relate to what I've been through, and especially with that of the music and this being Black Music Month. I was like, I gotta talk to my cousin.
Yeah. Well, music, my pleasure. Music is a soundtrack. It's a soundtrack of our lives, basically. Yes. Mm-hmm. And, for me, it has long since been a coping mechanism. It has been a way to escape. And especially because I've had my share recently of family and close friends dying, it definitely has aided in that process of coping and healing and moving forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. So without further ado, if you would be kind enough to kind of just share your, I don't want to say, grief affects people differently, but if you would be kind enough to share what's recently taken place within that of your own family regarding that.
Well, I had the unfortunate circumstance of both of my parents dying. As a matter of fact, it was June. So this is later on this month, it will be, an anniversary for that. Both my parents died June of 2020, 5 days apart. So needless to say that amount of time between was like you're being kicked almost. It's like just being kicked in the face, that you deal with the two most important people in your life that close together. Even with Father's Day coming up, it was around that time. As a matter of fact, it was my dad died on Father's Day.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was overwhelming for me. And you're in a tailspin. Anyone who has lost a parent can tell you how that tailspin is a whirlwind of emotions, of everything. Your whole entire life flashes before you. And to have to do that close together, it was overwhelming. It was certainly overwhelming. The support of my spouse, the support of close and dear friends were the only thing that kept me going during that time. It was like you almost could not breathe. And I would have to say, for me and for many others, your mother is your be all and end all. So the grief is different. It's very different. It felt different, a maternal grief passing than a paternal passing. I don't know. When my mother, and excuse me if I'm a little emotional.
It's okay. Listen, it is fine. I don't want to interrupt, and I don't want to listen. This is an area where I want you to be as authentic, organic. I'm giving you the support and love, be intentional, and you are safe. So if you
feel that way. Yeah.
So if you feel that, cuz go right ahead, please.
Your mother, losing my mother felt like I could not breathe initially. Losing my father, there was sadness. But losing your mother really knocks the wind out of your sail. It really, really, truly does. So it's been a journey. It's a continuing journey. And I even say this and share this with others friends who are losing their parents, one or the other currently, that you don't get over the sadness. You just kind of learn where to put it. You learn how to process it. And so it's not as overwhelming. But there, you have your moments, and certain things can trigger the emotions, can trigger the sadness. It can trigger, and it triggers happiness as well. When time passes, when you've dealt with it, when you have processed more of it, you're able to have the happy moments in your reflection as well as the sad.
Well, and even though it's been several years since it's happened, I'm going to offer my condolences again to you, because again, as you stated, it's a process, and there are things that trigger us, good and bad, happy, sad. So again, I continue to offer my condolences. And the fact that this took place the year the pandemic had erupted, I can't even, listen, when my mother passed in March of 2020, we were just able to lay her to rest before everything literally shut down. And you and so many other people I know who had lost people that same year, where even the homegoing celebrations for our loved ones who've transitioned on had completely shifted, just changed because of the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just sharing, what was that like as far
Yeah,
as celebrating them during a pandemic?
that was an overwhelming time for the world
Right.
and a fearful time for the
Hmm.
world.
Hmm.
So certainly that had its impact because you're already in you're trying to cope with a worldwide pandemic, something unprecedented, something that we'd never seen on the scale that we saw it in 2020.
Right.
And so processing that, you're already in a very different space,
Hmm.
just trying to cope with that. And so having all of this happen during that time just sort of exacerbated all of the emotions and all of everything that was going on. Um, I coped with the pandemic quite well, I have to say. It didn't take me out of my space the way it did some. Dealt with it, took precautions, and actually it was a moment or many moments of reflection because you didn't have the typical um, interaction that you have with people ordinarily. Even at work, I worked for an airline, so airline travel was greatly impacted that latter spring slash summer into the winter months and everything like that. It was greatly impacted. We weren't working a lot. So the income wasn't normal. So you're juggling that. You're juggling how to deal with bills. You're juggling how to basically survive when your job is that of travel, when your job is that of taking people from country to country, from city to city. And with that being said, um, I think I sort of was in a space to, well, I'll do a lot of reading, I'll do a lot of cooking. And, I was coping with that quite well, actually. And then, the unfortunate passing of both parents in a short period of time um, made it a very different type or a very different way of handling um, the funerals, the all of those things that were happening, is I'm sure you can relate to as well with your mom passing during that time. That's not the same. You can't, even when you're in the services and things, you have to have masks on. You can't even really share yourself as you would want to. It was challenging. It was.
That's, and I'm thank you for sharing that and kind of, painting a picture on what that was like, because again, there was so many people who had lost their loved ones who could not do the traditional services for those who've transitioned on because of the pandemic. So you have the pandemic and you're still going through the grieving process, and then you're still working what happens after the grieving process with settling their affairs and everything. So
Sort of a when it rains, it pours sort of situation. I kind of
okay.
felt and say that I felt that way with
Okay.
both parents. Like I said, were less than a week apart. With the pandemic and all that entailed, and the fallouts from that, and monetarily and everything. There was a lot going on. There was a lot going on. So, back to the music, it was an escape for me. It
Right.
was, even that was different because, there initially a lot of things weren't available, like the parties and that sort of thing that I would normally have done as my side gig as a DJ. Um, so but yet, you can always turn on your music and listen at home and everything. You don't have to DJ a party to enjoy that. So as I mentioned to you before, I produce music and remix and do those sort of things too. So it was a time to strengthen my craft and do work on projects, and that was helpful in coping with the loss, quite frankly.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one question that I have is how has grief itself, what have you learned about who you are, who Melvin Gentry is
I've
through grief
learned
and loss?
I've learned that Mel is strong. I've learned that Mel is vulnerable. I've learned that I have a wonderful support system from, lots of good friends and family and stuff like that. I do have a good support system. I've learned that. I've also learned that you can't bury things. You have to express yourself. You have to get those emotions out. Some of us like to go inside ourselves when we're going through things, especially something like death, something as impactful and significant as a parent or parents passing. I've learned that eventually things will manifest themselves, even if you're not grieving. Grief is weird, it's strange, and it knows no time frame. It knows none of those, it knows none of those things. So even initially, I think I was a bit shell shocked because so much was happening at one time. I even had a couple of friends say, well, you're dealing with this remarkably well. And I felt that I really was handling it pretty well, considering the magnitude of losing both parents so close together. And weeks later, I was feeling worse than I felt initially, almost, if that's possible. Because, you got to take care of the business, you got to handle a lot of things, and you don't have the time to let it all out. But eventually it's going to come out, it's going to manifest itself. Yep. So, that's, so I learned that there is no time frame for grief. I learned that you really probably, it was suggested to me that I go through therapy. And I never have ever been opposed to therapy. I've delved in, in it, and, had a few sessions throughout my life. But this, I really would suggest that anyone talk to someone professional when they're going through an impactful and excruciating loss, to give you the tools to cope and function.
Absolutely, absolutely. So do you feel, even if you look back when everything happened in 2020 to even now, do you feel that you give yourself permission to grieve?
Oh, certainly.
Outwardly?
Okay. Definitely. I'll cry I'll cry if a baby loses a tooth. I mean, I will express myself. That's who I am. You can't, that's the only thing that stops us from becoming serial killers, right? You have to, release your emotions, and you definitely have to. No, I never have a problem with that.
Awesome. Looking back to when everything happened in 2020 to now, do you feel that there's been changes as far as how you handle grief initially? Or do you feel like it's still even, it's still the same way? And what I mean, that's basically the gist of it.
I would say it's pretty even for me. That's a good way to describe it. I don't really see any changes that I've done, um, or that I've gone through. It's pretty much, it was pretty even.
Okay. 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 And even with that, again, to lose your parents 5 days of each other, Jesus. Um, how has your spiritual practice, your relationship with that of the source, God, how has that shifted, if at all, or how has it changed?
I don't think it's changed a bit. I think it's been a
Okay.
constant. I've always been a very spiritual person. I definitely believe in a higher power, and I summon that for strength during that time, as I do typically in
Mhm.
good times. Often our prayers are extended when we're going through things,
Mhm.
but I've learned in my life the importance and the need to express and to pray and to ask for guidance and strength when you're happy as well as when you're sad.
So, what has your spiritual practice taught you when it comes to courage, hope?
I would say essentially that it has taught me that everything will be all right if you believe, if you stay steadfast and strong in your faith, that things work themselves out. That's what it has taught me, that no matter what you're going through, there's someone else that has it exponentially more than whatever you're going through. You don't want to hear that while you're going through something. That's a bit of a cliche, but um, you know, it does. It works. Life works out that way.
Understood. Understood. Now, again, you've mentioned in earlier about how house music, or how your music or your interaction with music has really helped you through some difficult, dark times. What is it about that genre of music in particular that resonates with you so deeply that you
I think that
engross yourself with it?
I think that house music specifically, or dance music, house music, they're kind of under the same umbrella.
Mhm.
Um, that it's energetic and it's it's dance. You dance. It's not even just like listening to a ballad or just regular music where you might bob your head or whatnot. You're dancing, you're moving around it, you're releasing energy and endorphins and things of that nature. And that is helpful. And it makes the genre of music very special. It's very lively and energetic genre of music. So that I think within itself translates to happiness and feeling and getting up and moving around and dancing. So it does that.
One of the things that I know, again, we're family. We all grew up in a church frame of mind, and of course there was always the sacred music, the hymns, and that of the Gospels.
Yeah, we share that in common. Both of our grandparents were ministers.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So my question to you is that do you feel that that type of music also gives you the same connection, it resonates with you to the same level as that of house music, especially when it comes to your journey of healing? Do you feel that they're both on the same level, or do you feel one is more than the other?
I think it does. I definitely think it does do the same exact thing, it kind of does it in a different way for me. I would say that the gospel music tends to make me more reflective.
Okay.
It tends to make you more, I would say, it tends to make you more calmer. It pacifies you. It wraps its arms around you in a different way than, when you're listening to secular music.
So when you are in the frame of mind of producing, mixing music together, to share with the world or the audience, do you sometimes feel it pulling or what's the word I'm looking for? Do you sometimes feel that it unlocks things that you might have hidden or things that you might have suppressed at the time? Do you feel like when you're listening to other musics and things like, oh, well, I thought I had already dealt with it, but actually it hasn't? Do you ever feel like that sometimes with the different music that you may be putting together?
Thought I had dealt with, I'm not quite
So,
sure.
so what I mean is that, is there ever a song or is there ever a music, a genre when you're mixing things together, producing music, do you ever feel that it unlocks Pandora's box with you about something that you felt you might have dealt with, or something that was suppressed to where now it's out in the open and now you have to deal with it?
Yeah, I think that that's the case. I think that, when, certain music makes you, music is a timestamp, it's a soundtrack. So I do think that it evokes that type of response, definitely.
Okay. So you mentioned soundtrack to one's life. So if you had to name your soundtrack right now, what would you call the soundtrack of your music or your life in general? What would you name it?
What would I name it? That's a tough one. That's kind of putting me on the spot.
Thank you.
I don't know. I thought right now, as I age, and I'll be 60 this year, so that has its journey and everything too. I'll say way back when. That's what I call my story.
Way back when.
Right,
Wow.
way back when. Definitely.
Well, for somebody who's supposedly turning 60 this year, I can't tell. You look phenomenal, cousin.
Well, thank you,
I
cousin.
love it. I love it. So just two more questions. So if you had to share, if you had to give a piece of advice when it comes to grief and loss, what do you think is essential? Like, what are the 2 or 3 things that you feel somebody should hear when it comes to grief and loss, and how to move through it to get to the healing component?
I would say share your feelings. I would say exercise. I would say, if nothing, a good friend of mine who had lost his mom gave me, it sounded very basic, but he gave me the advice of taking a lot of deep breaths. And that has a physiological advantage as well, because it helps release, it helps you to oxygenate yourself. And just, take a lot of deep breaths. When you're overwhelmed, breathing, it's crucial to how your body handles things and reacts. It calms you. It can be soothing.
Great. And so with that, I just want to know, because first of all, thank you so much again for doing this. I appreciate it. because you are in the mindset of that of music and house. I'm sure you have some upcoming events or what's up, what's next for you for this summer? I mean, the summer is
Oh,
here.
I just recently did a Latino festival in the suburbs of Chicago. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, also, I did a Twitch show, which is a format primarily used for gaming initially, but a lot of DJs since the pandemic have been using Twitch as a method of having live performances and things. And I had something recently with a two-time Grammy Award nominee, Terry Hunter. He is from Chicago. He's a Chicago native, and he invited me on his Twitch show yesterday. I did that. Have a couple of festivals coming up. My birthday is August, and that's a momentous one for me since it's my 60th. So I have a lot of things that I don't have exact dates for. One in particular that I enjoy doing every year is called For the Love of House, and it's in Chicago on the South Side. And I do that one annually. And this year it will be done in conjunction as to with a celebration of my 60th. I typically do the 31st Pier in Chicago every year. And that's on Thursdays. So one of the Thursdays in August, probably the first or second, since that falls around my birthday also. I'll be doing that. It's atmospheric, hundreds of people there. It's right on the lake. There's the beautiful Chicago skyline in the background and everything. It's a very nice event.
Nice. Well, I can't wait to see and hear.
Lots of festivals.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Hopefully I'll get out there to see you do your
I'll have to let you
passion.
know.
Yes, please let me know so I can share it with my people. Because again, I'm about that house music, and I haven't been to a house music festival in Chicago area. Most of mine have been obviously in the New York, New Jersey area, and Philly, so in Maryland. So if I can get to one in the Chicago area, because clearly that's the birthplace.
Yeah, that's one of the Mecca, the house Mecca.
So I want to experience that.
Things that go on here are it's very much woven into the house music is woven into the fabric of the culture of Chicago. It essentially is just such a big part of the culture here. People live it and breathe it.
And I want to experience that. I definitely do. So again, thank you so much, Melvin, for joining me on this episode. I love it. I appreciate it. And for those who were watching and listening to this, thank you so much again for showing up. Not for me per se, but really for you to just hear people's stories when it comes to grief in life itself. And one of the things I want to continue to share is that there may be times where you may feel lonely when it comes to grief and loss, but please know and remember that you're not alone, that there is numerous support out there to help you on your journey to get you back to living in the moment. Go ahead.
Sorry, I would also just like to thank you for giving this podcast. And often we don't talk about grief, especially it's cultural amongst Black people, that a lot of times we just sort of put things to the side as far as our feelings, our emotions. We've had to historically be a strong race of people. And sometimes that strength and how it manifests itself and keeping it going is sort of who we are as Black people. And so we don't a lot of times allow ourselves that vulnerability, the dialogue about things that are challenging and things that are complicated to the point of emotionally and that sort of thing. So I thank you, cousin, for having a platform that talks about such an important aspect of our lives. You know, death and grief and things of that nature, um, especially as we get older, it's natural causes a lot of times. It's other health challenges. I've lost a fair amount of friends over the last 10 years, um, that are some younger than me, with health challenges, with things of that nature. So I thank you for the platform of sharing my feelings, of sharing how I coped, ways to cope. And it's very important. So I can't stress enough how my gratitude to you for being that light, to being that beacon, to allow people to have a way to talk about things like that. Like I said, we often don't, and so it's important. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. This is definitely a labor of love, and again, it resonates with me and with you and with so many people, because unfortunately it's not something we can avoid.
Yeah.
Everybody's dealing with grief in some capacity. It may not be to regarding death, but obviously when you're thinking of grieving, you're thinking of something that has passed on,
Yes.
or has ended in terms of a death. But there are so many different types of grief out there that, whether it's a grief of losing a relationship, or even a grief at your workplace, or grief of your dealing with your own health issues, that at one time you might have been able to run a 5K marathon, and now you are just hoping to be able to make it from one end to the room to the next without collapsing or being in pain. So we're all dealing with some type of grief or loss,
Yeah.
but it's just
Mhm.
understanding and relearning, or not even relearning, but just changing the mindset in terms of what that new norm looks like moving forward. So I appreciate the words which you just shared with me. Again, I'm here to help people, and it actually it helps me, because again, we need to talk about this. We can't do this behind closed doors, because
Mhm.
because of what's happened in the past. As you said, in our culture and history, we've always been the type to do it behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Don't show the world this side of you. But the world has changed. It's not like it was back in 1950. Now it's more open, it's more engaging, and it's actually okay to express yourself like this,
Wow.
whether it's through music, through dance, through just conversations. Support systems come from all walks of life, and I just think we need to have more of that than separation. We need more support than separation when it
Oh,
comes to.
definitely. One thing before we end, I would like to also share, and that is a lot of times I know with me, my parents were teenagers when I
Mhm.
came into the picture.
Okay.
They were 15 and 16 years of age. And so, with that being said, they were children, so they're going to make mistakes. They're going to do things, and they're trying to learn. Parenting, period, is learning, even with adults and people that have much more life experience. But my parents were children. So, of course, there were complications, there were extenuating circumstances of lots of dysfunction and all of that, So, with a lifelong journey of that, and somewhat estrangement at times with both parents and everything like that. And that can be a common thread a lot of times. So your grieving is reflected very differently when you've had estrangement in your life. But I can say this, no matter how estranged your relationship can be, you tend to still have a certain grieving process when you lose a parent. There are regrets, there are things that you wish you could have said, there are all of these things that you wish you could have expressed. And even, as I said, even with no matter what place you were with your parents, they were indeed your parents. Because I often wondered, I'm a very reflective person. And because of my journey, I wondered, even before they had passed, how will I feel when they're no longer here? And I thought I had it figured out, but I didn't, and how you grieve. And the grieving process for me manifested itself completely different than I had ever imagined.
Well, and you know what, you're right. You hit it on the nail, because there's no family that's perfect. And I know my family has some dysfunctionalities, as you stated, as well as yours. Everybody has some dysfunctionalities. But you know what, that does play a key role in terms of how you grieve for that loved one that you might have been estranged from, whether that's your parent, whether that's a spouse, whether that's a sibling. It does play a major role about that. And that's
sometimes that estrangement can even exacerbate your grief, because a lot of things are unresolved.
Yeah.
And you still have questions.
Yeah.
You still have there's anger. There's all of the above.
Yeah.
So that can be a very crucial element in your grieving process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know for me, I still have some questions regarding my mom and I, because we didn't have a close relationship, but there's still things I do wonder and wish what coulda, shoulda, things like that. And just talking with other people who've had similar relationships with their own parent or grandparent, so thank you so much for bringing that out to the forefront, because that does need to be addressed as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to use the same tools in order to cope.
Yeah. And have to address it.
Yes.
And it has to be, you have to recognize it, you have to address it. And though that person that you had a strained relationship with is no longer here, eventually you have to make peace with it.
Yes.
Because you may not be able to get the answers you want.
And sometimes the closure is that there is none.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's accepting that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Melvin, thank you so much, my cousin. I love you so much. I do. And again, thank you everybody for listening on this episode. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Please check out the description of this episode. Ask some questions, share your thoughts on this episode. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care and have a blessed day. Take care.
You as well. Take care.
Thank you for listening, being intentional, and sharing this moment with us. We at It's Not You, It's Grief deeply understand the many facets of grieving, and we want to make sure we can be here for you. Again, thank you for listening, and tune in again wherever you subscribe to podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time. Be well.